It's been a fascinating part. I am not 1,000% sure at this stage whether we have the shape absolutely perfect. I am absolutely sure that we have the curvature of the pot, correct? I would be prepared to argue that we perhaps need a pot 1/4 of an inch larger or 1/4 of an inch smaller at the top. But it's pretty close. It's within that range, I think, because we've been able to establish these as all looking right. Someone said, well, how do you know when it's right? And I think it's like lots of things in this life. It has to look right. That doesn't mean that when you measure it, it's absolutely perfect. But there has to be some case of symmetry between the curve here and the rim shape and the decoration. And I think if you look at most of these pots, this period or 1,000 years older, they have this sort of symmetry. They look nice, that there's a good feel about them. And that really is nothing to do with whether that is 1/4 of an inch wider, 1/4 of an inch smaller. The top balances the bottom of the pot, and it looks great, as well as being a functional pot. I remember Christopher Hawkes, the great professor of archaeology at Oxford, looked after Bronze Age materials and when he wasn't teaching. And he found a pot that was upside down with a hoard of bronze pelt staves and spears in a field. And the entire top of the pot had been ploughed off because it was buried over the sherds. And it was ploughed off to about here. And it was this exact shape. The pot was completely oxidized. It was red. A little slightly plainer top, but exactly that shape. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I wondered what shape the bottom was. I hope nobody asked me to put a bottom on. By and large, and it's changing radically. Most of the archaeologists I've worked with in the field around the world, if they have a piece of rim, piece of base, and they can draw it and assume what shape the pot was, tend to lose interest in the sherds after that. I would think we've got a greater responsibility, because I'm trained as a conservator. If we put them in showcases, there is a little pile of pot sherds and it says Bronze Age 3000 BC or whatever. And people go by and say, you know, what's that? Looks like the dog's dinner, you know. So for me, I think if you can reconstruct the pot, it does something to make the museum public, who is getting broader and broader, it makes them aware that their ancestors weren't that terribly primitive people. You know, they were making some pots quite beautiful. The beaker pots in Europe, really quite beautiful. And along with these pots, the beautiful jewelry, the shoulder brooches inlaid with garnets. And I think it moves people's perception of our ancestors forward. I've been very lucky, as you know. I've worked in New Brunswick with the Mi'kmaq people directly, working through the archaeological survey of the provincial government. And I've been up there sticking pots and taking pots up and talking about them. And I've actually met people, old ladies, who said, I remember my grandmother making pots, which was magic and a wealth of knowledge. And they just couldn't believe that these were the pots that were made. And they're on show now in the Interpretation Center of Mi'kmaq peoples there. And it was a great bridging of cultures, I felt. You know, they were incredibly proud of these pots that were their pots. They weren't my pots. I'd just been reconstructing them. I think everybody in the world is proud of their culture, if they can see it, if it's interpreted and brought to them in museums. But for the native peoples, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to meet with these people and return their artifacts, I guess. It's been wonderful to trace the history of pots in a way. But for me, apart from the fun and challenge of what I do for a living, the end product for me is to get a pot that's only sherds into a showcase somewhere in a museum so that people can understand, hey, these people were really good. This is better stuff than we get in Walmarts or wherever, you know. It's more fun, it's more beautiful. That's me and pots, I guess. I mean, pots, in a way, are a very major part of my life. If I go to somebody's house for dinner, I turn their plates open to see who made it and where it came from, what's the fabric. I mean, pots aren't something I do for a living, they're part of my life. I think we can teach people all about adhesives and all about the technology of how to stick a pot. But then you've got to work with them, they've got to work on their own, they've got to have time to practice and stick pots together. You know, I've got this huge pot, this piece here, how am I going to assemble them? And it's that thinking outside the box, I think. But having looked at a lot of pots, if you're a conservator, you've got to go to museums, you've got to go to storage areas, you've got to go look at pots. You've got to go to archaeological excavations, see how archaeologists dig them up, how they're treated, whether that piece of pot is flat because it had big stones on top or whatever. You have to acquire all that knowledge. So you have to have an interest in the culture and history of the people and know when it looks right. So I always say to my colleagues who are archaeologists, well, that's what I think it looks right. Does it look right to you? I would like to say to people that if we go on just restoring and conserving the things that are going to be used for exhibits, at some stage they're going to get worn out. There are very few things, as you know, as an archaeologist, that last forever, perhaps some stones and things like this. The metals are going to go, these are going to go 100, 200 years, something like that. And they're in storage because they're in pieces. There are very few complete pots that are excavated of this sort of period, this sort of material, because they're so fragile. So eventually we're going to run out of pots. And we're going to have a piece of film from Epcot or somewhere showing that these are the pots people made. I think not. I think really, I hope that day's gone, that the public really want to come into a museum and see the real thing. Because they're beautiful. It makes a magnificent display. You can talk about the potters and the people who lived then and their original things. They're not drawings or recreations. There's a great move now to consolidate what we've got. That is to provide conditions in the storage where things won't deteriorate. But I think in a way we're kidding ourselves, you know. It's made of earth, it's going to return at some stage. And we're going to keep it going as long as we possibly can. We're trying to extend the life of something which has got a finite life. If you restore a pot like this, you've extended its life tenfold. Sherds like this in a drawer, in a storage cabinet, are going to deteriorate and break up. So I would plead people like real things, and these are real things. For me, it's been a great joy and a great honor as well. But it's been really great fun to come back and share laboratories with people like Caroline and work with colleagues like you to do these pots. And I'm very conscious without your driving force, and usually the finance, these pots would not have been restored. And so I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And it's been a great joy, what can I say?